Okay, people did join us. So we're very pleased by the registration list, but we have a lot to cover, so want to get going. Welcome. Thank you all for giving us an hour and a half of your Thursday. We're really excited to have this conversation. My name is Leslie Payne. I'm an initiative director at the Irvine Foundation in our Better Careers Initiative, which is our workforce development initiative. And Irvine, one of the impetuses for this conversation is the report that we commissioned a couple of years ago about the landscape of co-ops in California. And you know, the impetus for that is Irvine has a mission, a North Star of ensuring that all low-wage workers have the power to advance economically. And so we very much center economic opportunity and power building. And co-ops have come up again and again in our different bodies of work as a way to really meaningfully do this. At the time when we commissioned the report, we were engaged in 3 major initiatives, one on workforce development, one on worker organizing, and one on local economic development. And each of those had questions about co-ops. And then we started to explore whether, housing co-ops are some of co-ops, some of the more common co-ops in the United States. We were very interested in just that. And when we put out an RFQ for this report, this team came back and said, you have to add childcare co-ops. And, it ended up being incredibly fortuitous, knowing that we were already in a childcare crisis before the pandemic. But now, having this research, looking at the different models and opportunities for childcare co-ops, we're so grateful that the team added that. And, coming out of it, if we want to go to the next slide, as we were engaging in the research and shaping it, a friendly pushback that I got from one of my colleagues was, well, aren't co-ops too niche? And I think what this research really helped me to crystallize is they're small but not niche, and there's a difference. And, we are just, from the research, from our partnership with the researchers on this call, we're sort of more excited than ever about the potential for cooperative ownership, shared ownership across companies, businesses, housing, and childcare to really change the balance of power and economic opportunity in California, if not the country. We've seen evidence of it, especially in Europe, and we're seeing really meaningful progress even in California. So it's not niche, it is small, and there's real opportunity for support. And so we've got a powerhouse team speaking to you today. The presenters' names and their affiliations are on your screen right now. And I believe I'm handing it over to you, Hillary, to introduce a brief discussion of California co-ops and why they matter.
That's right. Thank you so much, Leslie. And thanks to everybody for being here. We're just delighted to be having this conversation today. Melissa, let's go to slide 5, where we start the authors panel and then the key findings. Yeah, so my name is Hillary Abell with Project Equity, together with Kim Kuntz, who you'll hear from shortly. We were the primary authors, and we also worked very closely over the course of a year and a half with Ricardo Nunez of the Sustainable Economies Law Center, who is on sabbatical in Mexico and not able to join us, but his impact on the report is very big. Let me start by just sharing some key findings to reiterate, Leslie's wonderful opening comments. So what we found was what we already knew, just intuitively, but taking a closer look, digging into data and analysis, we found that co-ops are already addressing the greatest economic challenges that Californians are facing. And of course, these are the same challenges folks in other parts of the country face as well, but we have a particularly acute housing crisis here, a very high cost of living. And so things like the Great Resignation that's happening across the country, where workers are saying, these jobs just aren't good enough, even with the raises that are coming. I need more voice, I need more agency and more stability and support in my work. So worker co-ops are providing quality jobs throughout California, and hundreds of housing co-ops and hundreds of childcare co-ops are providing affordable, truly affordable and high quality alternatives to Californians. We also were able to kind of step back. All the organizations involved are hopefully thought leaders, and we hope this paper will really advance the field understanding of how cooperatives can help California thrive. But we're also practitioners. So we work with a lot of partners around the state. We work with a lot of co-ops. But in this research, we got a sense of the large number of diverse stakeholders, including folks like Leslie from the Irvine Foundation, including many lenders who are mentioned in the report, CDFIs, nonprofits, and many local governments. And we've also been engaging with state government agencies more over the past 2 years. So diverse stakeholders are interested in cooperatives, as evidenced by a very diverse group that's participating in this conversation. And many are already contributing to what we hope will be a growing movement and a growing impactful part of our economy. And now to just continue a brief introduction, I'd like to let you know what is in this very large PDF. If you downloaded the full report document, you'll see that it's 2 of which you'll meet today. The San Gerardo Housing Cooperative, and then there are 3 in-depth profiles of worker cooperatives. One that I wanted to mention is the Arizmendi network of cooperatives in the Bay Area. And then there's one of Cal Solar. You'll hear from Tasia Torres, who's with us today. And that takeaway actually has, that case study has some key takeaways and analysis of what makes a co-op conversion happen. What are some of the things that we've learned at Project Equity in partnership with Cal Solar and many other companies about readiness factors, timing, and things like that. So there's a lot we won't be able to speak to today because of our limited time, but you can learn a lot from the report. There's another deep case study that can tell you more about startup co-op development, and that's of YOLO EcoClean Cooperative. The next click there, Melissa. So you'll be able to learn about the great work that California Center for Co-op Development did with immigrant workers in starting YOLO EcoClean, and some reflections on different approaches, medium touch, high touch, different ways of approaching and key components of co-op development. You'll find a wealth of information. I mentioned Ricardo. There's a wealth of legal information on each of the kinds of co-ops, also on co-ops in general, so you can find out what the statutes are. Go ahead and click, Melissa. And each section has a list of California statutes and IRS codes affecting a housing co-op, worker, or childcare. And then finally, you'll actually find a list of the co-ops around the state. So if you want to find out what worker, housing, or childcare co-ops might be near your community, you can look at our appendices. And finally, one more click, we do have an executive summary. You can download that separately if you like. And if you want to read 10 pages instead of 150, you can get the gist in a short read. So that's some of what's in the report. And with that, we're going to dig into each kind of cooperative, and I'll hand it off to my colleague, Kim Coons.
I think I'm on mute. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I'm really happy to be here today and to talk about childcare co-ops. All of these presentations are going to be at a pretty fast clip and just provide an overview of childcare co-ops. So Melissa, if you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So we have a crisis, and that's really what we're addressing in this report. Are these crises in these 3 areas. In childcare, we were already in a pickle in a way before the pandemic. The pandemic just increased everything, particularly had an impact for mothers of children. We were reminded that while there are many households that share the parenting equally, unfortunately, we still have the predominant pattern that women bear that responsibility more. And during the pandemic, what we found was the crisis in childcare. We found out we can't really work at home and take care of our children effectively at the same time. Many women were forced to reduce their hours, causing layoffs in many cases. In other cases, women who were able had to drop out of the workforce. So we have a multiple crises going on here. If we focus on those aspects that really are the most predominant right now in the childcare arena. We just have a basic shortage of care. There's really not very many options. This is even before the pandemic. And there's only enough licensed spaces to serve less than, it's 24.5% of infants and toddlers whose parents are looking for work. And then we have a really acute affordability issue, which is that childcare is the second largest expense for families. It's anywhere from 24% to 34%, but there are actually some families that are paying much more because, of course, a percentage depends on what your income is. So this is a big expense that families are facing. There's also inadequate subsidies. So for those poor families who can't afford childcare, this situation, of course, is much worse. So those the way that subsidies are set up, we have subsidies at different levels we have federal money, we have state money, we have some money through the Department of Education and some through the Department of Social Services. In California, if you count all of those different sources, there's only about enough money to serve about 13% of the people that are eligible. Now, there have been some increases, but you can imagine it's a big lift to make a difference here. We also have a crisis in worker pay. Childcare workers are the lowest paid, among the lowest paid workers in the country, basically. About 58% of childcare workers who qualify for some kind of public assistance. That's how little they pay. And what we're finding in all of these different areas is none of these problems are colorblind. Race matters, unfortunately, and people of color bear all of these burdens much more than people who are non-Latino white. So, for instance, among early childhood educators, about 40% are African American, and they earn, if we make some comparisons, African American childcare workers earn 78 cents per hour less than their white counterparts. Well, all of these things then lead to a fragile workforce. Even people who really, people that go into the field of childcare usually are there because they like children and they like the work. Sometimes they just can't stay there because it doesn't pay enough. So we have a very fragile workforce, and there's about a 26% turnover of childcare teachers per year. You can imagine what that does to the quality of care for children. These are young kids who are just forming attachments. They need a trust relationship with a caregiver who may be there for them, caring for them 10 hours every workday. This is an important time in children's lives. We can move to the next slide, please. And then there's the economics of childcare. The reality is that we have a good system of regulations. And this, when I first started my career and was looking at childcare, the problem was that the regulations were not good. They were bad for kids. So I would say that we've made tremendous headway in terms of regulations that make childcare safe. And of course, we're talking about licensed care here. One of the predominant things that's important for kids and keeping them safe is the ratio of child to adults. And our regulations for this ratio differ depending on the age of the child. So for infants, it's about one adult per every 3 children. And then for preschool, it kind of goes up by the ages. As you can imagine, for preschoolers, it's about 1 to 12. Some flexibility there. And then school age, the rate is much higher. Where we have the most problem is where the ratio is lowest. So it's and where the care is the most expensive. So you get into this kind of balancing act, economic balancing act. There's a limit to how much people can pay. And there is where centers are cutting costs is on what they pay caregivers. And this is a situation because in our country, this is a privately paid service that people have. So that's what undermines all of this. And so we have to look at ways to say there's this balancing act. In starting childcare centers, one of the things that we start with is a feasibility study. And I've done feasibility studies just recently where the difference just in cutting a small amount, for instance, being nonprofit versus being nonprofit, there are very, very small margins. So very, very small changes make a difference. We can go to the next slide, please. So one of the models that is most predominant in California, has a very, very long, rich history, is the parent model. This is where parents are the deciders and the members of the cooperative. There are about 238 right now in California. And those parents hire a childcare director who hires and oversees all of the employees, childcare workers. This entity is organized as a charitable nonprofit, not as a co-op. And the parents in these entities often volunteer time. A lot of times it's not very much. Sometimes they're serving on the board. Sometimes they're helping with some bookkeeping. They're helping with some fundraising activities. And sometimes they can choose to work in the classroom and help in the classroom. This situation creates sort of a community of parents and teachers where parents are learning from the childcare workers by working with them, by observing. And the focus of everyone is on the children. What happens in this, some research that I did quite a while ago, is that amazingly, it makes the experience much more, much richer for both the teachers and for the families who are participating in the care. And what we find is a drastic reduction in teacher turnover and also better pay in those centers. We can move on, finish up. I just want to talk about one example really quickly, which is the Stanford Children's Center, Stanford Community Child Care Center. It's a cooperative that was founded in 1969. It now has grown to offer care for up to 210 children that are infants through 5 years of age. It's organized as a charitable nonprofit, and it represents the model that we're recommending in the report, which is having both parents and teachers and workers on the board and members of the cooperative. In order to have the maintain the nonprofit status, there needs to be slightly fewer workers that are on the board and representing the co-op. But I think that this model would work the best. And that's what we discuss in the report. We can go to the next slide because we're running low on time. I also want to talk about the role of employers. Employers are valuable stakeholders. And that's why Stanford decided to put more money and to enlarge that childcare center, because it was so successful and they needed it, not because so much of a generosity as it's important. Employers are stakeholders in childcare. When we look at what happens when there's near or on-site childcare, we find recruitment goes up, we find retention goes up, we find a reduction in absenteeism, people feel more company loyalty, and they report better satisfaction in their job. So employers, there's no way that employers can cover the full cost of care, but they can contribute sometimes in kind, offer a space, offer some amenities in the workplace to help the child care center cut costs. And then if I can just do the final slide, we kind of played around. Well, what if we had money? What would we do with it? So funders, listen up. This is what we are suggesting, provide technical assistance in development, help to establish co-ops, and help. We also have and discuss in the report what we can do to help those family home daycare providers who are also very, very valuable and important in the childcare arena. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kim. I learned so much about childcare and housing cooperatives from you, so thank you for that. So again, I'm Hilary Abell with Project Equity, and I'm going to speak about worker co-ops. I've been doing worker co-op development in California for almost 20 years, and I'm really excited to share some of what we found and some of the recommendations we had in our report. In the interest of time, I'll keep the definition really short. My favorite definition is simply that worker cooperatives are businesses that are owned and controlled by the people who work there. And one of the most common questions I get about worker co-ops is, how do they get started? And they can start as startups, either independently started by the workers who want to build a business together, or with support from a cooperative developer. And an increasing number now are starting through the transition of a successful 10, 20, 30, 40-year-old business to employee ownership through a worker co-op. Now, we all know about the COVID-19 crisis. I'm going to spend very little time on the problem side of this, but I want to just emphasize the opportunity we have here in California for small business transitions to worker ownership. 2/3 of California small businesses have been negatively affected by the pandemic, not surprising to us. And this is data from this month. So that's a huge, gigantic number. And over 40% of them still think it's going to take them more than 6 months to return to normal. So worker ownership transitions, whether the time is now or later, employee engagement, rewarding employees and retaining as well as attracting them is really key for any business right now. And worker ownership can help do that. There's also the pre-existing condition of the silver tsunami, and this is the retirement of the baby boomer generation. 10,000 boomers are turning 75 every day, and many of them own businesses and haven't retired yet, but eventually will, and most do not have succession plans. So we are seeing healthy small businesses in many communities across the country closing simply because there's not a successor. In California, it's about 300,000 businesses that are at risk for this reason, and that represents about 3 million jobs. So transitions to worker co-ops already are creating solutions for some of these companies. I'm going to talk a bit about impact with a few data points and then a few examples from our wonderful, rich California community of worker co-ops. But first I want to mention that worker co-ops are one of several kinds of broad-based employee ownership. They're the one we focus on in this report. There's also employee stock ownership plans, of which there are about 7,000 across the country. And there's something called employee ownership trusts. And we at Project Equity like to educate business owners and interested stakeholders about that whole spectrum of options. Because depending on the size, the nature of the business, and many factors, one or the other might be a better fit, but all have great benefit for workers and businesses. The 2% increase in sales and employment is a study from the ESOP community. And this one on the left is from worker co-ops, a study from the Democracy at Work Institute that showed that worker co-ops were 8.5% more profitable than other companies in their same industry. So we see that stronger businesses are created through worker ownership. There's also a strong argument for quality jobs. And in the pandemic, there was a wonderful study that came out in October of 2020. So within 6 months, this research was done, and it showed that employee-owned companies were 4 times more likely to retain jobs than other companies in their same industry. And in some cases, those other companies were getting PPP loans, and an employee-owned company that didn't have or didn't need a PPP loan was actually keeping people on their payroll at even greater rates. So this was an ESOP study, and also something that we found anecdotally through our conversations with worker co-ops and a survey that we did as part of this research. So this survey reached about 1/3 of the worker co-ops in California. My cat is making a cameo here, so it's truly COVID times. And we had the help of some student researchers from UC Berkeley, which we really appreciated on this study. It validated what we already knew, that worker co-ops do create stronger businesses and better jobs. So the job satisfaction, I like to say, is through the roof. This quote here is from Restive Cleaning up in Arcata, which is a company converted when it was, I think, about 9 years old in the early 1990s. And we hear this from everybody we talk to, that support, flexibility, all of the ways that a job can be made more humane and more sustainable for workers are showing up in worker co-ops. We also found that more than 60% of the folks who responded to the survey said that they believed that their company was more productive because it's a cooperative. And when we looked at companies that were past that challenging startup phase, co-ops that were well established, that was actually 70%. So we do believe that worker co-ops are stronger businesses because they're owned by their workers. We wanted to get a second opinion, if you will, about, an assumption that I know Kim and I came into as authors, which was that co-op developers play a really important role in creating strong cooperatives, and that one of the ways that we can have more of them is by strengthening the co-op development capacity of individual organizations, building on successful co-op development experience, and also new co-op developers. There's a lot of interest. And we are seeing a sort of younger cohort of co-op developers who are more likely to be folks of color. Worker co-ops are spreading like wildfire in the Black community and in the Latino community in particular. And in fact, the board of directors of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives is majority folks of color now. So there is a myth that people think co-ops are a lot of people who look like me. And that's not actually true anymore. This is truly something that's making a difference for Black and brown workers and for low and moderate income workers across the country. Our survey did find that almost 60% of the cooperatives said that support from co-op developers had been an important factor in their success. And that is especially true for cooperatives whose worker owners are low and moderate income workers and folks who face barriers to quality jobs and to business ownership. It was also exciting to see that about 2/3 said that support from other cooperatives was really important to their success. And we are definitely here to say that if you are an investor, a capital provider, a foundation, a government official, anyone who can help resource this work more, that's very much what's needed. But in doing so, we can all feel confident that we're supporting a model that is self-sustaining. Self-reliance and mutual support are core values of cooperatives. And so the cooperation among cooperatives that we found in our survey is one example of that as new co-ops form, they get a lot of support from other cooperatives, and then they become someone who can provide that support to others in the future. Other kinds of technical assistance, I know we have SBDCs and nonprofits on the call who provide business TA. You also have a role to play. And of course, outside financing is really important. That was only said by about 1/3 of our respondents in our survey. So a lot of people think that outside capital is the most important thing. It is very important. I think as we have more of it, we will see more co-ops growing and developing and becoming larger and more successful. So come on in, and let's also complement that with the critical role of co-op developers. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the landscape and share some quick stories. We are finding that the impact of co-ops in California goes well beyond those jobs. It goes into communities. So Mandela Grocery is a now 12 or 13-year-old grocery store that has brought healthy food into a food desert in West Oakland and is a model for Black self-determination. And there's a story on our website about how Mandela Grocery showed up for their community. They started online sales and delivery for elderly folks and all kinds of things during the pandemic. So they're a remarkable example of community impact. You'll hear more about Cal Solar, which of course is spreading green energy, and they're very committed to local. They only work within an hour and a half of their location in Grass Valley. And since they became a cooperative in 2019, we've learned that they increased wages at the company about 20% across the board. And just recently, they increased their contribution to employee healthcare from what it was before. It went from 50% to 80%. So definitely quality jobs there. And I can't wait to introduce you to Tasia in a few minutes. And Feed Cooperative is one of the few for-profit food hubs. There are many food hubs trying to get healthy, organic, locally grown food out into communities and institutions and families. And it's a really difficult thing to do. This is a company that has done it successfully for more than 10 years. And just last year, they became a multi-stakeholder cooperative with local organic farmer ownership in Sonoma County and also workers. Now, I know folks are wondering, how many are there? We found that there's about 100 worker co-ops around California. But the main message we want to tell you, we know that's actually a small number. It is a significant portion of the worker co-ops around the country. But it is such a small portion of what we can do. And cooperatives of all kinds, especially worker co-ops, but all kinds, are well proven, but underutilized. So with more investment, we can create hundreds more of these. I'll just quickly give a few examples of co-ops that have started as startups. These are well-known co-ops. Alvarado Street Bakery sells its bread around the country. Rainbow is the largest worker co-op in California with more than 200 employees. They've been around for about 50 years. In the 1990s, there was a cutting edge wave of cooperative development. So we now have 7 Arizmendi cooperative bakeries and 2 additional construction businesses supported by the Arizmendi Co-op Development Collective, which is part of that cooperative. And Emma's EcoClean started in 1998 and is still going strong with almost 30 immigrant women co-owning that business. And that was started by an organization I used to lead. It's now called Prospera in 1998, believe it or not. Mandela Grocery and another wonderful community-based co-op called Rich City Rides in Richmond were started in 2009, the 2010s. And recently there's a new wave of startups in the staffing industry. So Allied Up is a really interesting one in the allied healthcare industry that was started in partnership with a union, SEIU UHW, and Turning Basin Labs. So you can see that there's a lot of innovation and a lot of growth. The transitions of worker co-ops is something that Project Equity specializes in. It covers many industries, as do all worker co-ops. So food, retail, and distribution is one. Manufacturing is one. We're really eager to partner with manufacturing extension partnerships and folks promoting middle wage jobs in manufacturing. Solar, we're seeing more and more solar companies look at this model, and construction as well. And there's quite a few residential and commercial service companies. That said, there's many other industries as well. So I'm going to close in the way that Kim did by sharing what we came up with when we did that thought exercise of, if we could come up with 100 million for co-ops, we'd give 63 million of that for worker co-ops, and here's how we would spend it. So the main thing I want to drive home about this is that we would want to put the majority of that towards creating and growing worker co-ops through transitions, startup, and growth of existing co-ops. The transition opportunity is really huge, and these are some of the ways that money can help support employee ownership transitions. Startups, of course, are also critical, and certain things are not possible through transitions because you're working only with existing businesses. Bringing more diverse kinds of patient capital into the space is also important. And we would really like to deeply engage small business development centers, workforce development boards, and other government agencies that have systemic presence throughout the state and could help to scale this work. I noticed we have Leila Roberts from North Coast SBDC, which has been a leader in this on the call. And finally, we at Project Equity are working with a number of local governments in California. So there's proven models and case studies and a community of folks who want to do more of this. So we'd like to see more government engagement at all levels. One of the things that we're doing, and I'm quite a bit over my time now, I'll just close on the next slide by saying that a number of our organizations, including all of the ones who authored the report, came together early in the pandemic to form a coalition called Worker Owned Recovery California. And we are hiring a staff person. We have a wonderful lobbyist named Alicia Benavides Lewis, who will be speaking later about what we're doing. But we wanted you to know that everyone can become involved in this coalition. And it's really a good time to make systemic change and to make political change that supports cooperatives. And we're working on that. So with that, I'll hand it back to Kim. Thank you.
Again, here we are on our clip, and we're going to talk about housing cooperatives now. And if we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. I want to just call out this crisis. We are focusing here on ownership, because if we want to create stable housing for people, really ownership is the best way to do that. A lot of people have great rental deals. They have good rent, they have stability, they've been renting in the same place for a long time. But the fact is that is dependent on the owner of the place that they're renting from. So that entity could sell. They could decide they don't want to rent anymore. There's lots of things that could happen. So we are promoting home ownership. There's also in the report, we discuss all of positive outcomes when studies have been done looking at ownership versus renting. We find that the advantages spill over in many ways to all family members. But this crisis isn't affecting everyone equally. If we look at ownership right now, we see that, again, there are stark inequalities in if we break it down by race. And part of this has to do with the 2008 crisis. There were more people of color who had homes that they owned, and they are the people that lost them. during that crisis. And so I just want to call out that we are not talking about a situation that affects everybody equally. It's bad for everybody, or most people, but it affects people of color the most starkly. Let's go to the next slide, please. I want to talk about, we're going to focus on a particular model of housing cooperatives called the limited equity housing cooperative model. I want to say that the thing that makes a co-op is not the construction. You can have cooperatives that are single family homes. You can have condo-like, they might look like apartments. There are even co-ops that are scattered site. That is not what makes the co-op. The co-op is made by the ownership structure. And ownership in a cooperative is facilitated through a cooperative corporation. And then each household is a member by owning a share in that, an equal share in that corporation. Each member has an occupancy right then to a particular home or unit. That's their home. The households are owner occupied because we want the perspective to be of decisions to be based on being a person who lives in that community. And the corporation is then democratically controlled and governed by those residents. And the vote is by household. It doesn't matter how big your household is, each household gets one vote. I just want to, this is just kind of a picture that kind of helps to, I think, in my mind anyway, visually see the differences between these models. So in a condominium association, each individual owns a divided piece of the property, right? You have an entire community and you own your unit separately. In a housing co-op, all members combined own an undivided share of the property. And of course, you get none of the pie when you're renting. So with big differences there. So also the limited equity housing cooperative statute has built-in mechanisms to assure that that housing stays affordable as people move out and so forth. So it really, they're in perpetuity. There isn't even a deadline for when that happens. As long as they're a limited equity housing co-op, there is going to be a cap on the amount of appreciation or equity a person has in that home if they sell their share. It can be zero. There's zero equity that are just going to sell that share at the same price they purchased it for. And it can go up to 10% increase from the original price. Additionally, the sale or dissolution is controlled by requiring that the limited equity housing cooperative goes to a nonprofit, not the members. And this helps to prevent speculation. So if I get calls all the time in our office for people that have realtors that have found a housing co-op and they want to get the contact information and they want to try to see if they can sell. And you can imagine if you're a member of a housing cooperative and being told, wow, you're going to get all this money for if you sell this community, each of you will get $100,000 or something like that. But the fact is that limited equity housing co-ops, that statute says that if you sell it, any equity, you could get your money out, but any equity is going to go to a nonprofit. So that helps with that speculation. And there have been a lot of studies on one particular housing cooperative in California, and it's called Dos Pinos Housing Cooperative in Davis, California. The reason that it has had so much attention and research is because it's in this kind of unique situation. If you look at that plot map on the right, it is showing the area where Dos Pinos is. And within just a couple of blocks away from each other is a apartment complex and a condo complex. And so there have been studies that have looked at these particular, what is the difference between these over time? What do we see? They've looked at comparisons in these three in terms of cost of entry, the monthly cost, in terms of cost of entry, a rental, you just pay your deposit. So the rental is the cheapest, but for owning a condo, of course, the difference is quite a bit. We looked at the monthly cost. The monthly cost of the housing cooperatives is far below both renting apartment and the housing payment in a condo. And the ability to get interest and appreciation, again, you have some changes there. And the cost of selling and your share in a co-op is zero, because you can move from unit to unit. If you have a family and you've grown, you want a bigger unit, you can move without cost, and you can sell your share without any cost. So let's just have a little review of the advantages of limited equity housing cooperative. One is affordability. There's affordability from one owner to the next. If you compare those to a lot of programs that are helping people, first-time home buyers, basically in terms of cost for the government to subsidize that kind of thing, it's much higher, because each time you help somebody on a home, that price is going up. Not the same with a cooperative. It's an inexpensive form of intermediary home ownership, the operations at cost. And what people can do with that savings that they have in their housing is that they can save for a traditional home if they want. They can send their kids to college. They can decide to go on vacations. They can live a better life. Accessibility, there's that low transition cost. They can borrow collectively. You don't have as much vulnerability like we found in the 2008 crisis. Housing co-ops did great during that time. There's lots of flexibility. You can have different types of populations. You can have senior housing. You can have specialized housing, students, so forth, intergenerational or special purpose. And you can change those units without any transition costs. So let's go to the final dreaming slide. Again, a piece of that $100 million, 25 million of it, we were talking about going to LEHCs, and we have some dreaming that's talked about in the report to fund the development of these kinds of co-ops, to provide technical assistance to organize their co-op. There are some programs through Caltrans that are discussed in the report that are great. They give priority when land is taken away for a highway project. Co-ops get first priority, but there's no technical assistance or any help for them. So it makes it very, very difficult to take advantage of that. And then we have money for education for policymakers and so forth to spread this good news. I think we're moving into the phase right now where we're looking at what are the experiences of some people that are actually in co-ops.
And this is Hillary. I'll take this moment just to thank Melissa Jurdy, who is staffing all the tech behind our panel today and pulling up the video for us. She's been wonderful in preparing this event for the last couple of months and navigating the tech.
La revolución, viva nuestra asociación, viva huelga en general. Ya saben los contratistas.
This is the story of Chicano working families and their struggle for low-cost housing, a struggle they waged alone against the big companies and the laws of the rich.
Mantener familia, más sueldo necesitamos.
My name is Horacio Amezquita. I'm the general manager for San Geraldo Co-Op. San Geraldo was built by the farm workers and their families.
Camp McCollum has been closed since 1966 when the Bracero program ended.
The purpose of the co-op is to provide housing for farm workers, low-income families that don't have the means to buy a house. This is the way for them to have a house of their own where they can live without fear of somebody kicking them out. They bought the land and got a loan from the USDA for $2.2 million, and that was in 1979. So this is Abel, and he's one of the members. He always plants a lot of chiles and vegetables and fava beans. Yeah, Ava. By 1990, the health department found out there was a contaminated well. By 1993, they found the second well to be contaminated. By 2001, the third well was contaminated. They put us in bottled water. It was never enough.
All these valleys have been made by our own hands. And with our sweat, we've planted and harvested the food that is eaten in the cities and towns.
The community doesn't have money to fix the drinking water, which the agriculture industry polluted. So we have to rely on grants. Communities that have 20, 30 years waiting to get clean water and they haven't. We are lucky that San Gerardo got these grants. They've been here since '79 and they're still here in the present.
So it is really with great pleasure that I would like to introduce Horacio Emesquito, who's here to talk about San Gerardo. San Gerardo is actually one of a handful of co-ops in the Salinas Valley that were started and are still going pretty strong today. Horacio is a graduate. He's been a manager of San Gerardo for 16 years. He's a graduate of CSU Monterey with a degree in business administration. He sits on several water advisory boards, including GSA, one established by GSA, groundwater sustainability. And he works with farmer training nonprofit called ALBA, which focuses on farmer training. So it's really, it's a pleasure to know you. I've been working with Horacio for many years, and I'm really happy that he is able to be here with us today. So I'm just going to kind of lead this a little bit with some questions. Horacio, San Gerardo has been a successful co-op for more than 40 years. Can you share some of the ways that the cooperative has impacted the community?
Sure. I think one of the most important things that happen in San Gerardo is that people have a place to live. They have low rents. A 4-bedroom is $483, a 3-bedroom is $333. So they save money here, and whatever money they can save in their pocket, they have money to send their kids to school. So that's one of the very first ones that they get opportunities to live in San Gerardo. The second one is that we have a small fund to help anybody that loses their jobs, that they get disability, and they cannot pay full rent. So we subsidize the rent with the fund that we have. So, and we also, you know, they have to take care of their homes and make them better every day. So that's the main ones, and we have to be united. If the members are not united, then the co-op is not successful.
So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but can you give a little update on the water situation? I know that you've been working on it pretty hard for quite a while now.
Yeah, the county, we received $6 million, $3 million from the State Water Board and $3 million from the Obama administration to build a water system, a brand new water system. But the county owns the system because San Gerardo did not qualify to get the money. And so the county has put it for sale, but we went back to the State Water Board and said that San Gerardo wanted the water system because it was built with public money. So the State Water Board, they approved that San Gerardo can get the water system, and they send a letter to the county and say, you can sell the system or you can transfer the system to San Gerardo. And the county right now, they're doing the final things that they have to do to the water systems in order to transfer the system to San Gerardo for whatever amount or for whatever agreement it needs to be done, they approved that San Gerardo can get the water system. So we just waited. The pandemic is putting us back like a year and a half, but it's still working. It's still in the works.
Thanks. So if you were thinking about a lot of experience and you've already you share so much of it already. If you were giving recommendations to policymakers for addressing the housing challenges that are faced by farm workers and other low income households, what would you say? What would you recommend?
You know, we borrowed $2,100,000 from the USDA to build the co-op, and we pay more than that. We return every penny that we borrowed to the government, and we return more to them. And that can be done the same thing over and over. If you create more co-ops and the state will put in money to build co-ops and get their money back, you will be helping many farm workers and workers that get very low wages that cannot even rent a house. They could not even buy a house. Right here in Salinas, it's about 68% renters. And so if you help in this way, creating more housing co-ops, you're going to get more families into houses. You're going to have less families getting evicted. You're going to create more units that are needed in the state, and you're going to have less homeless population. So this is the best way, by creating co-ops, that people have a place to live and they don't have to worry about getting evicted or live in the streets.
Thank you so much, Horacio.
You're welcome.
Turn it over to Hillary now.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Horacio. And we're going to have another video now, actually, to transition to our conversation with Tasia Torres of California Solar Electric.
My name is Tasia. I've worked at California Solar Electric Co-op for 2.5 years, and I'm the office manager and monitoring specialist. My favorite thing about working at Cal Solar are the people, my teammates. I feel like they're family. If I had to decide between a corporate job where I was getting paid a little more and being part of a co-op, I think that I might still choose to be part of a co-op because it's more community and there's more vested interest from my other coworkers. We're all a part of this together and we understand that, and it just helps us all to be better employees. We have more integrity for the work we do, and I feel like we have more feelings for our customers. I mean, as part owners, we want to be as successful as we can, because if we're successful as people and we make the company successful, then we will be successful. I just think that worker co-ops are a great place to work and be. I can't explain it any better. I think it creates more community. It helps you trust your employer more because you're your own employer, and you're allowed to have a vested interest in the company. You're allowed to know what the financials are. Nothing is a secret. If we want to know how much the company is making, all we have to do is ask. And I think there's serious benefits to knowing the financial health of your company and just knowing that you're a part of the company and you do have a voice that's heard. Owning a company with a bunch of people that I like is great. I feel like this is one of the best things that's happened to me and one of the best opportunities that I've had to grow in a company. I mean, basically here at California Solar, sky's the limit. You can kind of do what you put your mind to.
Thank you. And Tasia, welcome. It's so great to have you here live. Thanks for joining us. One of the last things you said in the video was that being a part of California Solar was one of the best things that's happened to you. And that is a really powerful statement. And in fact, that's why I do this work. Co-ops can have that effect on people. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your before and after story.
Yes, definitely. Honestly, before I came to California Solar, I had gotten into a little bit of trouble. So I was at a point in my life where I didn't even know if I'd ever really find a good job or good gainful employment again. So when I got hired here, they told me that they were in the process of transitioning to a co-op and that I could actually be a worker owner. And, that came at a point where I didn't even have the slightest idea of having like any equity in a real legit business. It wasn't even like a dream or a fantasy or a thought. So for me, that was pretty amazing. And now I've been here 3.5 years and I'm on the board, and it's been life-changing.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I also know that you have a new role within the company. So I'd love to hear how that came about and what you're enjoying about it.
Well, we've actually, as a company, we've kind of exploded. And so as we exploded, we needed to kind of look at our job roles and redefine them because things were kind of getting out of control. And so in my position as receptionist, phone answer, triage person, it was only natural that I kind of take what I've learned and moved into the monitoring aspect service department. So now I'm in charge of kind of monitoring almost 1,000 solar arrays that are in our fleet and
Wow.
coordinating the service calls for our company. So yeah,
Wow. That sounds like a big job. And I'm glad that it's only one job instead of 3. And it's great to hear how the company has addressed those challenges of growth because you're in such an important industry. We'll keep this short because we are a little late on our time, but I did want to recognize that you're in Grass Valley and that you had a major extreme weather event just after Christmas and are just coming out of that. And when you were telling me about that last week, it struck me that the way you all handled that was an example of a culture of learning and improvement, and getting together to get through challenging times. So anything you want to quickly tell us about that?
Right. And kind of when you spoke, how you were speaking of how co-ops are can be more productive. I feel like that was a great example of us all pulling together and taking on this challenge that we had when, our Teslas didn't respond to the weather and the power outage as we expected. So, it was great to be part of a team where everybody cares.
Yeah, nice. And, we were amazed when your colleague Angelica told us about how you had managed to basically hit your 2020 sales goals in spite of the pandemic. And part of that was because you innovated and you came up with a new idea and sold 200 Tesla power battery walls to support the solar systems in like 2 months. So it really is an inspiring story. And I want to just end by coming back to the fact that you're on the board, which is amazing. And we'd love to just hear why it's important to you to serve on the board of your cooperative.
Because part of, one of the great things about being a worker owner or part of a cooperative is that you can participate. And so I think it's important that you take that chance and that you participate when you can. I feel that I am like a conduit for my coworkers, fellow worker owners, and just regular employees for anything that they want to say. I'm like, I want to be their conduit to take this to the board and, raise up their voice and help them be heard.
Nice.
And feel like they're part of this co-op culture.
Beautiful. Tasia, thank you for raising your voice. It's really inspiring to hear your reflections, and thank you for sharing them with the folks here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Great. So I think that our next step is to transition over to talk a little bit about how cooperatives can scale. We know that there's huge potential here, and one of the areas that can help bring these proven models to a meaningful scale is public policy. So with that, I'm really happy to introduce Alicia Benavides-Lewis, whose company Blue Coast Strategies has been hired by the Work Coalition. So Alicia also represents the Worker-Owned Recovery California Coalition. Thanks, Alicia, for being with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. As Hillary mentioned, I'm Alicia Benavides-Lewis, and I run the firm Blue Coast Strategies and have the privilege of representing the Work Coalition. So you heard a little bit about the coalition earlier, but really this coalition is doing such exciting work. Since we came together, we've been able to lay out some groundwork for some transformative investment into worker ownership. So this past year was spent educating and bringing awareness to members of the legislature, agency partners, and their staff to understand the impact that worker ownership models can have, not only with just the economic recovery that California is going through with the pandemic, but also to be about the long-term proven ways to build wealth in communities. So I get to cheerlead and talk about some of our really exciting successes that we've had this past year. And some of it's been securing legislative members in both the Senate and Assembly that were able to champion budget requests for the coalition. So getting our message out there in front and talking about why funding is so important to these models. Being able to provide testimony into committee hearings. So getting our member organizations to be the frontline face of telling their stories and explaining how these models work and why they've chosen to go down these paths. We've worked with the agency, the California Workforce Development Board on implementation issues, on the steps that can help provide better business support for entities that are wanting to convert over to a worker ownership model. We've also had some financial wins with helping secure $10 million to fund upskilling for nurse licensure for an LA-based cooperative. So it's really exciting to see that education, that outreach, and just the presence in the Capitol is having an impact. But what are we doing this year? So we're getting ready to start off with more education. We've got to build that base and that awareness within the Capitol so policymakers see this information as secondhand. They know it. We want them to be familiar and understand the different models that exist. We're also focused on engaging the coalition and getting more folks involved. So growth, and that means it's an invitation for all of you to start getting involved. So I'll throw into the chat some information on how you can get involved, get onto our listserv, and find ways to be engaged. But this is going to be an open call for entities that are interested, whether you're a advocacy org, research, or if you happen to be a worker-owned entity yourself. We really need your presence, because this year we're not only going to be doing that education, but we want to advance another budget request that will provide education and technical assistance for worker ownership models. So we really need to be able to say, hey, California, you have this surplus. Here's what a resilient investment can look like. And we want to have you guys at the table for that. We're also going to be working to ensure that employee ownership entities are integrated into the various levels of business funding and support services. So you're seeing all this federal investment and state prioritization for helping small businesses. We want to make sure that worker-owned models are part of that conversation, so that way we get funding that works. And what's going to help with all of that, again, is going to have all of you involved, being able to be at the table with us, helping share ideas, come up with other ways that we can support and provide a really robust infrastructure for worker ownership models throughout the state. And yeah, I will go ahead and throw the information into the chat. I'm going to send this over now to Kim to talk to you about housing policy, and I'll provide some more information about housing policy as well in the chat.
There's always also activity in the housing arena. One of the things that's been happening throughout the nation actually is increased intense investor interest in manufactured home parks. They're buying them up because what a great situation. You own the land underneath, where all the people that are renting those spots own their home. If they get behind on their rent, you just can usually take their home because it's too expensive for them to move it. CCCD has worked with, we're now an affiliate of a national organization, Rock USA, which has CDFI financing to help us to try to help the residents to purchase that land, and it has to be quick. So it's a really, really nice program. What we need in California are not only for manufactured home parks, but for many different situations, is opportunity to purchase statutes so that residents have that opportunity if they're faced with a sale of the property. So actually, Alicia is also working with the Sustainable Economies Law Center on another social housing initiative to put funds into supporting social housing, including cooperatives. And we are really promoting those kinds of regulatory changes also that will help smooth the way. So I really appreciate if people are interested. We really love to be able to call on you to advocate for some changes that will make limited equity housing cooperatives a preferred choice and recognized for what they are, which is a great alternative form of ownership, home ownership.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kim and Alicia, for helping to lay out just a high-level overview of the ways in which co-ops can scale and opportunities to get involved. So we've had a really robust set of questions and even more answers in more than half of them have been answered in the Q&A function of Zoom. So I want to sort of group some of these into bigger picture categories for how we'll use the time that follows. And one of the things that I think is really interesting that we haven't spent a lot of time on so far is the ways in which co-ops, especially worker co-ops, present an opportunity for undocumented Californians. Hillary, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this, about ways in which a worker co-op structure can help promote economic stability for folks who don't have as much access to traditional means of employment.
Sure. Yeah, one of the interesting things about our immigration policy is that if you have a lot of money, I think it used to be like $1 million or more to invest in the United States, to own a business in the United States, you can do that. You don't need to sort of have any restrictions around that. That can often help or gain you that immigration status. But if you want to own a business together, you don't have those options if you're not wealthy. There are lots of cooperatives that have been able to be legal, solid, successful businesses with folks working as independent contractors or partners in an LLC, for example. So any immigration status can work for that. Folks have to pay taxes, and actually they don't ask about immigration status. It just becomes a non-issue. So that is an area where there's been a lot of important work done over decades, and an important pathway to economic stability through business ownership that is open to folks of any status.
And so speaking of work that's been done across the decades, so much of the history of co-ops in the United States come from the African-American community. And Hillary, to start, I'd love to, there's a lot of information about this in the report, but I'd love for you to kind of quickly talk through that and just the extent to which worker ownership is rooted in racial justice in this country.
Yeah. And certainly I'm sure others would have a lot to say about that and would love to have some, if we had more time. There are lots of worker owners of color around the country who have a lot to say about this, but I'll just in the interest of time, I'll step in briefly. I recommend to folks a book called Collective Courage, written by Jessica Gordon Emhart, which is a robust academic history of cooperatives in the African-American community going back to the time when folks were enslaved. And there is a lot of growth among Black cooperators now across the country. Housing co-ops actually, and Kim knows a lot more about this, but have been affordable housing in communities of color for decades, and that's a real opportunity. But in terms of the worker co-op movement, as I mentioned, there are a lot of leaders in the movement who are Black and Latino, who are spreading the word in these communities. And we're hearing interest from Black communities all the time. Project Equity is actually in the process of launching a Black employee ownership initiative, and that's going to be national. And we've sort of analyzed where are Black workers working in this country, where are Black-owned businesses most concentrated. And one of the challenges is that Black-owned businesses, because of lack of investment and historic discrimination, tend to be micro businesses, which are harder to transition to a worker cooperative. But there are many out there that would be very successful as worker co-ops, and there's a lot of demand in the Black community. So we're proud that there's a growing field of folks interested in helping to meet that demand.
And Kim, for you, how does racial equity show up in the world of housing co-ops?
I think it's very visible, in part because the largest portion of housing cooperatives historically were actually formed through the default of affordable housing developments across the nation. And there was some legislation that said that residents could purchase those developments. And so a lot of those, because Black Americans were pushed into the outer limits, I mean, a lot of discrimination made them sort of be more likely to live in some of these projects. And so they were able to purchase those developments, and they still survive today. There's a national, the National Association of Housing Cooperatives has an annual conference, and that conference, the attendees are predominantly African Americans. So I think everyone of every race benefits from housing cooperatives, but we do see visible evidence that many people of color benefit from housing cooperatives.
Thank you. And so, I see a lot of questions in the chat that relate to, what are the supports available to co-op formation and conversion? What does that ecosystem look like, both on the technical assistance side and the financing side? Kim and then Hillary, can you speak to that? How should I think this audience is relatively familiar with a subset of supports, but how would you help folks understand getting even deeper access to that ecosystem?
I think that one of the things I feel really good about the report is that we call out this landscape of different organizations, and I encourage people to look at each sector has kind of a description of the whole ecosystem, the whole support system for cooperatives. I know that Project Equity, CCCD, all of us, we really enjoy our work. We're in this because we like cooperatives. I think on the financing side, we have some work to do, because traditional, for instance, housing cooperatives, they qualify for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, these federal funds, even to purchase your manufactured home community. But having the banks that are in California that will offer those loans it's difficult to access, and so we really need to work on that. Some of the same banks that fund co-ops in New York do not recognize that form of funding in California. So we have work to do there. It's not impossible, but we have work to do there.
Yeah, and one of our reflections in doing the report is that there is a robust ecosystem of well-established organizations, and that's really important. Most of them are pretty under-resourced and able to, have strategies that have us focusing in certain areas, and then there's demand in other areas, and there's not a lot of ability to just get that met right away. So it's important. I think what we wanted to express in the report was that there's a strong base to build on. There's gaps, and there's also a lot of interest. So some of the ways we think that can be addressed include, further resourcing for established organizations that understand the work and are ready to go in implementing new programs in new regions or to get to that next level of impact. And also very much supporting, organizations that are wanting to get into this work that haven't been in it before. There is a lot of that. We're not at all saying we've got what we need. We have mature organizations. We have mature organizations that don't do co-op development that could. All of that needs to be nurtured, and we really believe there needs to be learning from learning from existing lessons, because there's a tendency, cooperators like to kind of do it yourself. There's a tendency to kind of want to get excited and try and learn from scratch. And that's okay. But the crises we have and the challenges we have and the complexity of the work, mean that we really should learn from experience, but we also need to diversify and build out a broader ecosystem. I think what's underrepresented the most is blended capital. And what I mean by that is we need more grant funding to make this work really have impact in lower income communities. There is a role for grant funding. It's not just private capital and capital that needs to be paid back, but loan capital and investment capital is critical. And we have two funds, Project Equity through our partnership with Shared Capital Cooperative and Mission Driven Finance in San Diego that does loans to transitioning companies in California. So those loans are available. And there's other CDFIs like Community Vision and others that have done co-op loans and would like to do more. So let's create the demand, build the capacity, and the capital, I think, can be grown to meet the need.
Thank you. And I encourage folks to continue to drop questions into the Q&A feature. We're looking at that. And, from a funder perspective, and as the person in this group that's the least familiar with co-ops and kind of the newest to this field, a couple of things come to mind. One is there is such a robust set of resources among the cooperative community. This is a community that's very, sort of derivatively cooperative, with itself, in addition to in the ways in which it does its work. And like I said, just so much of that is documented. And so even, one of the top resources that comes to mind is the work that Rutgers does to just really codify practices. And from a funder perspective, it just can be a great way to learn about this. And, also from a funder perspective, there are multiple ways to support this work. I saw a question about the connection between housing co-ops and community land trusts. And there is one, I don't think we have time to fully explore it today. But I will say, philanthropic capital can support that in multiple ways, directly and indirectly. And one of the grants that we've done that I'm very proud of is to Community Vision and Genesis LA to support their work to kind of bring their innovative capital products to bear for community land trusts. So just, there's all kinds of nascent connections that philanthropic can help strengthen. So I'm turning over to look at the Q&A. And one other resource that I wanted to make sure that folks were pointed to is, as Hillary said, unfortunately, one of the co-authors was unable to join the webinar, but SELC is a great resource on the legal front, especially. It was Ricardo's expertise that injected a lot of the legal definitions and opportunities into the report, and folks should just feel very free to reach out to SELC, the Sustainable Economies Law Center, if they have more questions.
And Leslie, they can also email me. It's in the chat as well, since I represent SELC.
Thank you, Alicia. So I'm seeing several questions about childcare co-ops, which we haven't spent as much time on. Kim, I know you answered it in writing, but can you talk about the connection? We highlighted the model of blended parent-worker co-ops. What about worker co-ops and childcare? And can you expand a little bit more on how resource and referral agencies might better support worker co-ops, childcare co-ops, which is one of the recommendations in the report?
Yeah, definitely. I think worker co-ops model is great. The only thing is that there aren't very many of them. And because of the economics that I described, it's very difficult to do a worker co-op economically. So, for instance, in California, you have to pay a minimum $800 and some odd minimum tax every year. That seems like very little money, but that tax is something that all worker co-ops would have to pay. So that's why we're suggesting this combined model. But you can definitely organize a childcare co-op as a worker-owned co-op. In terms of resource and referral agencies, there is an R&R in every community throughout California, every county. What we'd like them to do is to help family home daycare providers either form a cooperative or provide support services so they can go on vacation. They can take a sick day and not have to have all the kids go home, that kind of thing. So there's lots of things that we discussed in the report about that.
Thank you. So before I turn it over to Hillary to close, I'd love to bring back your voices, Tasia and Horatio. Any final thoughts, anything, you've been here for this whole conversation, anything you think we didn't cover that you would want this group to know?
Yes, there's thousands and thousands of people that live in the streets, and local governments cannot keep up with it, neither the state, neither the federal government. And the best way of helping these people that need help, for whatever reason they need help, well, a lot of times it's families that are getting evicted because they cannot pay the rent or they cannot pay the mortgage. So if we can establish a $5 billion fund that can be to create co-ops, you can create housing co-ops, apartment co-ops. There's all kinds of co-ops that you can create. You can have people have a home, you can create jobs, and you can pay this money back that you put in from the fund to build co-ops. You're not going to give it away. You're just going to lend it for some time, and then you're going to pay it back. That's how we did it, and it can be done. And I think it's a good way for every Californian. Thank you.
And I would just like to follow up with most of my knowledge has been in worker-owned co-ops. So it was really nice to hear about these other different co-ops and how they work. And if I feel like if California Solar, if we had more, if our worker owners and our employees had more children amongst us, I think that we would definitely probably be looking at something like incorporating like a childcare co-op as well, because that, that seems like it would be amazing, but there's like, there's like maybe 2 of us with children. So, but yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you. And Hillary, I'll turn it over for you to start wrapping things up.
Okay, sounds good. Leslie, thank you so much. And Tasia and Horacio, thank you so much for your comments. You're really living the meaning of all of this work. So your voices are so essential. And Alicia, thank you for being our voice in Sacramento and for sharing your wisdom with the more than 100 folks who've been with us for an hour and a half here. And thanks to everybody who's participated. In closing, I'd just like to say that, as you've heard, there are opportunities to get involved. So one of the tricky things about co-ops is that a lot of folks find them intriguing, exciting, want to get involved. You can always be involved as a consumer. You can join your credit union. You can buy outdoor gear from REI. You can shop at local co-ops, and you can potentially be a co-op member yourself. Some folks can get involved in co-op development. It's a growing field. But one thing that everybody can do is get involved in advocacy for co-ops. So if you're interested in worker ownership, please do contact us at the Work Coalition. I think Alicia mentioned we'll have a public call that any potential members can join, and there's no bar to membership. It's come one, come all. And we also are advocating actively for the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which is going to bring almost $1 billion to California. Our state is getting by far the largest allocation of these funds. Now, the capital will be available to cooperatives because there are no official barriers. But the problem is that co-ops may not hear about it. If businesses are interested in having a loan to transition to a co-op, there's not enough awareness or education to get those folks to hear about it. So we'd like to see the state include worker ownership in their technical assistance application for SSBCI. And we're also going to be putting forward a budget ask to the state. So there's a lot to do around advocacy for worker ownership and also for housing cooperatives. As Kim mentioned, there's active work being done by her organization and by Sustainable Economies Law Center. So I'll let Kim wrap it up for us.
Yeah, I do want to say that our nonprofit has our conference, multi-sector conference, hopefully in person in Sacramento on April 29th and 30th. We will have an intensive MCLA legal section on housing cooperatives at that time. Really welcome you to that event. And just to say, just in sum, that we have crises in California. We have a crisis in inequality and in our workplaces. We have a crisis in childcare. We have a crisis in housing. And here we have methods, cooperatives that have been around and shown their success for many decades. And we need to connect those two so that people are more cognizant of the value of cooperatives, helping people to help themselves in meet these challenges.
Wonderful. Great. So we're going to wrap it here. And we know that some of you sent in questions ahead of time. Some of you had questions in the chat or the Q&A that we weren't able to answer. So we will, we're planning on getting answers out, at least to you individually, to those questions. And Melissa, who again, thank you, has done a wonderful job here. We'll be sending out the recording of the webinar as well in case you want to share it with others. Thanks again and have a wonderful, safe day, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.